November 8, 1942. The beaches of North Africa erupt with chaos as Allied forces launch their first major operation against Axis power. American soldiers crouch low behind sand dunes, gripping their rifles while massive German tanks roll across the desert toward them. The thunder of engines and the roar of 75mm guns cut through the air, tearing apart Allied defensive positions. To the soldiers watching from the sand, it feels like an unstoppable force moving straight toward them. Private First Class Robert Watson raises his M1 rifle and aims at one of the approaching tanks. In that moment, he understands a terrifying truth. His rifle, powerful against infantry, is completely useless against several inches of hardened steel. His .30-06 bullets cannot penetrate the thick armor of a German panzer. Around him, the rest of his platoon faces the same horrifying realization. They have no real weapon capable of stopping enemy tanks. If the armored vehicles reach their position, survival will depend purely on luck. But there is something on that battlefield Watson doesn't know. Something none of the American soldiers fully understand yet. Strapped to the back of their sergeant is a strange new device that will soon change the balance of battlefield power forever. It weighs only about 13 pounds and costs less than $50 to produce. Yet this lightweight weapon has the power to punch through armor that even massive artillery guns struggle to defeat. The invention did not come from a famous general or a decorated military engineer. It came from a man with no combat experience, no formal military education, and no background in weapons design. His expertise was in agriculture, chemistry, and industrial explosives used in mining. His name was Henry Mohaupt, a quiet Swiss inventor whose accidental discovery would give ordinary soldiers the ability to destroy the most powerful war machines ever built. Just 4 years earlier, Mohaupt had been working in a small laboratory in Switzerland. His goal was simple: improve blasting techniques for mining operations. He experimented with different explosive shapes and containers, hoping to make controlled blasts more efficient. During one of those experiments, he placed an explosive charge inside a cone-shaped metal liner. What happened next stunned him. Instead of exploding outward in every direction, the blast concentrated into a narrow jet of incredible force. That focused stream of energy punched straight through a steel plate. This strange phenomenon was known in scientific circles, but had never been taken seriously as a practical weapon. Most experts believed it had no real military value. Mohaupt, however, immediately recognized its potential. If explosive energy could be focused like that, a small device might achieve the same penetration as a massive anti-tank gun. While Mohaupt continued experimenting, events in Europe were changing the nature of warfare. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland and demonstrated a terrifying new strategy known as Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. German panzer divisions swept through Polish defenses with astonishing speed, combining tanks, aircraft, and fast-moving infantry into a devastating assault. Within weeks, Poland collapsed. Military observers around the world studied the campaign with growing concern. Traditional anti-tank weapons were slow and heavy, designed for the static trench warfare of World War I. British forces relied heavily on 2-pounder anti-tank guns that fired solid steel projectiles. These weapons could penetrate armor only through sheer kinetic energy, which meant projectiles had to be extremely heavy and fired at high velocity. The problem was simple physics. To defeat thick armor, a gun needed enormous power. That meant larger barrels, heavier ammunition, and bulky equipment that required trucks to move. Once deployed, these guns were difficult to reposition quickly. German tank tactics exploited this weakness perfectly. Panzer units moved rapidly across the battlefield, forcing anti-tank crews to fire at long distances where accuracy dropped dramatically. American observers reached similar conclusions during military exercises. The standard 37mm anti-tank gun used by U.S. forces struggled to penetrate modern tank armor, except at dangerously close range. At those distances, enemy tanks could often destroy the gun before it even had a chance to fire effectively. Scientists and engineers began searching for solutions. Some researchers proposed radical ideas like electromagnetic railguns that could launch projectiles at extreme speeds. But these concepts required massive power systems that were completely impractical for battlefield conditions. Other engineers tried increasing the power of conventional guns, but that only made them heavier and harder to move. The situation created a frustrating paradox. Effective anti-tank weapons had to be large and powerful, yet the modern battlefield demanded mobility and speed. Armies needed weapons that infantry soldiers could carry and deploy quickly, but according to conventional engineering, such weapons simply could not generate enough force to penetrate tank armor. While military experts struggled with this problem, Henry Mohaupt continued refining his unusual explosive experiments in Switzerland. His work suggested that the entire approach to anti-tank warfare might be wrong. Instead of relying on kinetic energy from heavy projectiles, explosives could be shaped to concentrate their energy into a focused jet capable of slicing through steel. If this concept worked on the battlefield, it would revolutionize warfare. Instead of massive guns weighing tons, a lightweight weapon carried by a single soldier could destroy armored vehicles. The idea sounded impossible to many experts. But history was about to prove that the quiet Swiss inventor had discovered something that would change modern combat forever. Henry Mohaupt was born on August 16, 1915, in the small Swiss village of Egg, located in the hills outside Zurich. His father worked as a chemist specializing in industrial explosives, which meant discussions about chemical reactions and blasting techniques were common around the family dinner table. Growing up in this environment gave young Heinrich an early fascination with explosives and mechanical experimentation. Few people could have predicted that this curious farm boy would one day create one of the most influential weapons of the 20th century. Yet the discoveries he was making in his modest laboratory were already laying the foundation for a revolutionary new type of anti-tank weapon that would soon appear on battlefields across the world. Henry Mohaupt grew up in a household where chemistry and explosives were part of everyday life. His father, Berthold Mohaupt, worked as an industrial chemist who specialized in mining explosives. Their modest home often carried the sharp smell of chemical compounds, and dinner table conversations frequently revolved around blast patterns, controlled detonations, and the science of breaking rock deep inside mines. For young Heinrich, this unusual environment quietly planted the seeds of curiosity that would later shape his life. Despite growing up around science, Heinrich showed little enthusiasm for traditional schooling. He struggled through secondary education and never stood out as an exceptional student. Instead of pursuing an academic career, he chose a more practical path and trained as an electromechanic. The profession promised steady work and financial stability, but nothing about it suggested the possibility of revolutionary inventions. At the age of 19, Heinrich completed his mandatory Swiss military service in 1935. His time in the army was uneventful and left no lasting impression. When his service ended, he returned to civilian life without any clear interest in weapons, warfare, or military technology. To those who knew him, he appeared to be just another ordinary young man preparing for a quiet technical career. Yet the event that would transform Heinrich Mohaupt into one of the most influential weapons innovators of the 20th century happened almost entirely by accident. While working as a technical chemist in Zurich, he set up a small laboratory in 1936 where he conducted experiments with industrial explosives. His intentions were purely commercial. Switzerland's mining industry relied heavily on controlled blasting techniques, and improving these methods could make mining operations more efficient and profitable. Heinrich hoped to design explosive charges that could break rock precisely without damaging valuable mineral deposits. During one routine experiment in the mid-1930s, he placed a small explosive charge inside a metal container shaped like a cone. Based on everything he knew about explosives, the blast should spread outward in all directions. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The shape of the container focused the explosive energy into a narrow, concentrated jet. That jet blasted forward with incredible force and punched straight through a steel plate. Heinrich stared at the result in disbelief. The thin sheet of steel now had a perfectly clean hole drilled through it, as if it had been cut by some invisible tool. The effect he had witnessed was not completely unknown. Scientists had observed a similar phenomenon since the late 19th century, a principle sometimes referred to as the Monroe effect. However, most researchers had treated it as a laboratory curiosity with little practical value. No one had seriously pursued it as a weapon. Heinrich, however, saw something others had overlooked. With the practical mindset of someone raised around industry rather than academic theory, he realized that this focused blast could solve one of the greatest problems facing modern warfare. Traditional anti-tank weapons depended on kinetic energy. Heavy metal projectiles had to be fired at tremendous speeds in order to punch through armored steel. Achieving that level of power required massive guns, large ammunition, and huge quantities of propellant. Shaped explosive charges worked in a completely different way. Instead of relying on the speed of a projectile, they used the energy of an explosion to create a high-velocity jet of molten metal. That jet could penetrate armor, regardless of the size of the weapon launching it. The advantages were astonishing. A shaped charge weighing only a few pounds could potentially penetrate more armor than a conventional anti-tank gun weighing several tons. Even more important, these charges could be fired from small launching devices that individual soldiers could carry into battle. If Heinrich's idea worked, it would change the balance of warfare completely. Infantry soldiers could suddenly gain the ability to destroy tanks without relying on heavy artillery. Confident in his discovery, Heinrich approached Swiss military authorities and requested permission to conduct larger-scale tests. Unfortunately, the reaction from officials was deeply discouraging. Colonel Hans Frick, the officer responsible for weapons development in the Swiss army, examined Heinrich's early demonstrations and dismissed them almost immediately. From the colonel's perspective, the concept contradicted established military doctrine. Armored vehicles were defeated by powerful guns firing solid projectiles, not by unusual explosive devices built by civilian experimenters. The verdict was blunt and final. The Swiss army required proven weapons based on kinetic energy, not experimental ideas that challenged decades of military engineering. For many inventors, such rejection would have ended the project, but Heinrich refused to give up. Throughout 1937 and 1938, he continued refining his designs in his small workshop. He improved the shape of the metal liners inside his explosive charges, experimenting with different materials and dimensions in order to create a more powerful and stable jet. His methods were crude compared to the laboratories of major weapons manufacturers. Heinrich melted down copper pipes in a homemade furnace and hammered the softened metal into cone shapes using simple tools. Each liner had to be made with extreme precision. If the metal was too thick, the explosive energy would not form the correct jet. If it was too thin, the metal would disintegrate before penetrating armor. Working largely through trial and error, Heinrich slowly developed manufacturing techniques that professional weapons engineers had never even considered. By late 1939, he felt confident enough to conduct a serious test of his invention. On October 26 of that year, he prepared his most promising prototype and loaded it into a crude launching device. The target was a section of railway rail, chosen because its thick steel roughly represented the armor of a tank. The shaped charge was remarkably small, containing less explosive material than a typical hand grenade. Yet Heinrich believed it might achieve penetration that normally required enormous anti-tank guns. When the device detonated, a brilliant flash lit the test area. A sharp crack echoed through the air as superheated metal punched through the steel target. After the smoke cleared, Heinrich rushed forward to inspect the result. A perfectly round hole had been drilled completely through the heavy railway rail. The penetration was astonishing, far beyond what such a small explosive should have been capable of producing. Encouraged by the success, Heinrich began demonstrating his invention to foreign military representatives in hopes of gaining support. Unfortunately, his next encounters with professional weapons experts proved even more discouraging than his earlier rejection in Switzerland. When British ordnance specialists examined his prototypes in Zurich, they reacted with open skepticism. Major Geoffrey Williams from the Royal Arsenal studied the crude devices with visible doubt. To him, the invention looked more like modified mining equipment than a serious military weapon. He politely but firmly rejected the proposal, explaining that the British Army required reliable weapons proven under real battlefield conditions, not experimental devices that might fail during combat. Seeking another opportunity, Heinrich traveled to Paris to present his concept to French military authorities. Their reaction proved even more devastating. French experts dismissed the hollow charge idea entirely, arguing that it violated established principles of ballistics. According to their calculations, No explosive device of that size should have been capable of penetrating heavy armor. Their conclusion was blunt. No responsible military organization would base its defense on such unconventional theories. For Henry Mohaupt, it seemed as if every major power in Europe had rejected the invention that he believed could transform modern warfare. American military observers who witnessed Henry Mohaupt's demonstrations in Paris sent detailed reports back to their governments. Unfortunately for Heinrich, the conclusions were far from encouraging. According to the experts reviewing the results, his claims appeared to exceed what they considered physically credible. The reports recommended that hollow charge devices should not receive further attention until they were verified by recognized ordnance specialists. For Heinrich, the rejection was devastating. The response from the international weapons community was nearly unanimous. Military authorities across Europe dismissed his invention as impractical theory created by an amateur with no formal training in weapons engineering. To many professional experts, the idea that a Swiss farm boy with basic chemistry knowledge had solved one of modern warfare's most difficult engineering problems was simply impossible to accept. Faced with constant rejection, Heinrich confronted a painful decision. He could abandon his strange discovery and return to ordinary industrial work, or he could continue pursuing his idea despite universal skepticism. Before he could even decide, events in Europe changed everything. In June 1940, German forces swept across France in a rapid campaign that stunned the world. The fall of France eliminated Heinrich's last real opportunity to develop his weapon within Europe. With much of the continent under German control, he found himself isolated in neutral Switzerland, holding a technology that no government seemed interested in supporting. What Heinrich could not know was that across the Atlantic, American military leaders were beginning to face a crisis of their own. Reports from European battlefields made it painfully clear that traditional anti-tank doctrine had failed. Existing weapons were simply not effective enough to stop modern armored vehicles. Desperate for solutions, the United States Army had started searching for entirely new ideas. That search would soon lead them to Henry Mohaupt. On October 18, 1940, a small gathering of American military experts assembled at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. Many of the officers attending believed they were about to witness a demonstration that would prove to be nothing more than a waste of valuable time and resources. Standing beside a simple folding table, Heinrich displayed several crude prototypes of his shaped charge devices. After months of complicated travel arrangements and bureaucratic delays, he had finally managed to reach the United States to present his work. The reaction from the assembled officers was far from welcoming. Uniformed commanders and civilian scientists examined the strange devices with expressions ranging from skepticism to open doubt. Colonel René Studler, head of the Army's Ordnance Research Division, inspected one of the charges with obvious skepticism. To him, the device looked more like modified mining equipment than a serious military weapon. He calmly explained that the United States Army required proven solutions for destroying tanks, not experimental devices based on theories that had never been demonstrated in real combat. Another expert, Dr. Clarence Hickman, one of America's leading specialists in ballistics, voiced a similar opinion. He pointed out that the basic principle behind shaped charges had been known for decades. Scientists had studied the effect since the 19th century and repeatedly concluded that it offered little practical value for battlefield weapons. From his perspective, Heinrich's invention was simply a repackaging of an old phenomenon that had already been dismissed by serious researchers. Despite the skepticism surrounding him, Heinrich prepared to demonstrate his improved prototype. The device was placed in position, aimed at a thick steel target plate used to simulate tank armor. When the charge detonated, a brilliant flash illuminated the test range. A sharp metallic whistle followed as superheated metal blasted forward with incredible speed. Observers watched as a concentrated jet struck the steel plate with tremendous force. After the smoke cleared, technicians moved forward to inspect the target. What they found stunned the entire group. The thick steel armor plate now contained a perfectly round hole punched completely through its surface. The penetration achieved by the small device exceeded anything that existing infantry weapons were capable of producing. For several long seconds, the observers remained silent, struggling to understand what they had just witnessed. Finally, Dr. Hickman spoke again, this time with a noticeably different tone. According to his calculations, the penetration achieved by the shaped charge was roughly 3 times greater than that of the standard 37mm anti-tank gun currently used by American forces. If the result could be repeated consistently, it would represent a fundamental breakthrough in anti-tank technology. The quiet tension of the test field suddenly exploded into debate. Major Thomas Reardon, who represented field artillery development, slammed his hand against the table in excitement. He argued that American anti-tank weapons were already proving inadequate against German armor. If Heinrich's invention offered even a chance of improvement, it deserved serious investigation rather than immediate rejection. A younger engineer, Captain Edward Ewell, added his own perspective. He explained that recent battlefield data showed American anti-tank guns achieving extremely low success rates against modern German tanks. If the new technology could increase those numbers even slightly, it could save countless lives. Despite these arguments, the debate continued. Some scientists remained deeply skeptical. Dr. Charles Lauritsen from the California Institute of Technology warned that the new device contradicted everything engineers believed about practical weapons design. According to traditional theory, a small explosive charge simply could not produce the same armor-penetrating power as a large artillery gun. Accepting Heinrich's idea, he argued, meant risking American soldiers' lives on what might turn out to be experimental physics. The discussion finally reached its turning point when one of the most respected scientists present stepped forward. Colonel Robert Goddard, widely known as the father of modern rocketry, carefully examined Heinrich's technical drawings. Goddard had spent decades working on rocket technology that many experts once considered unrealistic fantasy. After studying the design, he addressed the room quietly but firmly. In his view, the principles behind Heinrich's shaped charge were scientifically sound. The performance they had just witnessed was entirely consistent with established laws of thermodynamics and explosive physics. What made the invention remarkable was not the theory itself, but the innovative way it had been applied. Colonel Studler raised one final concern. Approving the project would mean restructuring American anti-tank doctrine around a concept developed by an unknown inventor. It would require significant funding, time, and resources, all during a period when the United States was rapidly preparing for war. The decision carried enormous risk. At that moment, General Campbell stood and brought the debate to an end. He reminded the assembled experts that existing anti-tank doctrine had already failed against German armored forces in Europe. Enemy tanks were dominating battlefields wherever they appeared. If Henry Mohaupt's technology offered even the slightest advantage, it could not be ignored. Turning toward the quiet Swiss inventor, the general delivered his final decision. Henry Mohaupt would receive full support from the United States Army. His project would be given top priority classification, along with the resources needed to develop the technology for battlefield use. Now he faced a new challenge. With the support of the American military behind him, Heinrich had to prove that his shaped charge invention could perform reliably not just in a laboratory test, but in the brutal conditions of real war. The room slowly falls silent as America's military leadership makes one of the most unconventional decisions in wartime history. The nation's weapons establishment has just agreed to gamble on the ideas of a quiet Swiss inventor, trusting his unusual explosive design to help stop the powerful German armored war machine. Yet before the weapon could prove itself on the battlefield, Henry Mohaupt had to survive another challenge: bureaucratic resistance inside the very system that had agreed to support him. June 14, 1942. Aberdeen Proving Ground Test Range. After nearly 18 months of development and experimentation, Mohaupt watches anxiously as American technicians prepare his newest prototype for testing. His shaped charge warhead is carefully inserted into an experimental launching tube known simply as the M1 launcher. At this stage, it looks crude, little more than a metal pipe with basic firing components. But within months, soldiers across the world would know it by a far more famous name: the Bazooka. The test target waiting downrange represents one of the most difficult challenges any infantry weapon could face. Engineers have positioned a captured German Panzer IV tank on the range. Its thick frontal armor, nearly 80 millimeters of hardened steel, has made it extremely difficult for Allied infantry to destroy in combat. Traditional American anti-tank guns struggle badly against this vehicle. Military studies show that the standard 37mm gun sometimes requires more than a dozen direct hits to guarantee disabling the tank. Even then, success is far from certain. Mohaupt's new warhead weighs only a few pounds, yet its explosive energy is concentrated with extraordinary precision. Sergeant First Class Edward Yule steps forward to conduct the test. He lifts the launcher to his shoulder and carefully aims toward the turret of the captured tank. The distance is roughly 150 yards, close enough that a real tank crew could easily destroy an exposed infantryman before he had time to fire. With a quick pull of the trigger, the rocket motor ignites. The warhead streaks toward the tank, leaving a trail of smoke behind it as it travels across the range. A split second later, the impact produces a bright flash of light, followed by the sharp crack of an explosion. Moments later, a secondary blast erupts from inside the tank as the vehicle's stored ammunition ignites. Observers rush forward once the smoke clears. What they discover is remarkable. The turret armor, one of the thickest parts of the vehicle, has been completely penetrated. A perfectly round hole marks the point where the shaped charge blasted through the steel. For the first time, a lightweight weapon carried by a single soldier has demonstrated the ability to destroy a heavily armored tank. The implications are enormous. Further testing soon confirms the weapon's effectiveness. Statistical analysis shows that the new launcher achieves an impressive hit probability against stationary targets at ranges up to 200 yards. This accuracy rivals many conventional anti-tank guns. Equally important is the weapon's mobility. Fully loaded, the launcher weighs just over 13 pounds. Unlike heavy artillery, infantry soldiers can move quickly with it, repositioning whenever necessary, and making it extremely difficult for enemy tanks to locate and eliminate the threat. Despite these promising results, there is still one final question that laboratory tests cannot answer. Would the weapon work in actual combat? That answer arrives only a few months later. November 8, 1942. Operation Torch. The beaches of North Africa. American forces land along the coast and soon encounter German armored units advancing across the desert. Among the soldiers waiting behind the sand dunes near the city of Oran is Private First Class Robert Murphy. In his hands, he carries one of the first operational versions of the new weapon, the M1A1 Bazooka. For the first time in military history, an ordinary infantry soldier is equipped with a personal weapon capable of destroying a tank. As a German Panzer III approaches across the open desert, Murphy steadies a launcher and fires. The rocket strikes the tank's turret ring and detonates instantly. Inside the warhead, a copper liner collapses under the explosive force, forming a superheated jet of metal traveling at nearly 20,000 feet per second. That jet slices through the tank's armor with terrifying efficiency. Within seconds, the vehicle erupts into flames as its internal ammunition ignites. The German crew scrambles out of the burning tank, abandoning one of the most advanced armored vehicles in the Axis arsenal to a weapon that costs less than a month's wages for an American factory worker. German commanders quickly realize that something has changed. Reports from the battlefield warn that American infantry now possess rocket weapons capable of penetrating even heavily armored vehicles at close range. Standard German tactics, which relied on tanks advancing confidently against infantry, must now be reconsidered. The psychological impact proves just as important as the physical damage. Tank crews who once felt nearly invulnerable suddenly realized that any hidden soldier might be carrying a weapon capable of destroying their vehicle with a single shot. Combat data from a North African campaign confirms the weapon's effectiveness. Within only 6 months, American bazooka teams are credited with destroying hundreds of enemy armored vehicles, more tanks than infantry weapons had eliminated in all previous American operations combined. The weapon's success becomes even more dramatic during the Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943. During one engagement, Staff Sergeant Charles Kelly confronts a German Tiger Eye tank, one of the most heavily armored vehicles of the war. The massive machine weighs nearly 60 tons and carries armor so thick that most Allied tank guns struggle to penetrate it. Kelly fires his first rocket, striking the tank's track and immobilizing the giant vehicle. His second shot hits the turret from the side, penetrating the armor and igniting the ammunition inside. Within minutes, the Tiger is burning. German officers studying these encounters quickly recognize the danger. Infantry weapons that can destroy tanks threaten the entire concept of armored warfare. Allied commanders reach the same conclusion, but with very different enthusiasm. General George Patton, observing the bazooka's performance in Sicily, orders that rocket launchers be issued widely throughout American infantry units. From that moment forward, every rifle company will have its own anti-tank capability. The success of the weapon forces Germany to respond. Engineers studying capture examples begin developing their own rocket-powered anti-tank weapons inspired by the American design. Meanwhile, production in the United States accelerates rapidly. By late 1943, American factories are manufacturing thousands of bazooka rockets every single day. What began as a simple mining experiment in a small Swiss laboratory has now become the most widely produced precision anti-tank weapon system in the world. Technical Sergeant James Thompson had seen the bazooka used in some of the fiercest battles of the war. From the deserts of Tunisia to the beaches of Normandy, he participated in dozens of engagements where infantry soldiers faced German armor. Looking back on those experiences, Thompson summarized the weapon's importance with remarkable simplicity. Before the bazooka appeared on the battlefield, the sight of German tanks often meant panic among infantry soldiers. When armored vehicles approached, the only option was usually to run for cover and hope that somewhere nearby a heavy anti-tank gun or friendly tank could stop the attack. Infantry units themselves had almost no reliable way to destroy armored vehicles. After the introduction of the bazooka, everything changed. For the first time, ordinary soldiers carried weapons capable of destroying tanks on their own. A single infantryman hidden behind a wall, inside a trench, or crouched behind rubble could suddenly threaten one of the most powerful machines on the battlefield. As Thompson later explained, the invention didn't just provide a new weapon, it transformed the nature of ground combat itself. Infantry soldiers were no longer helpless against armor. They had become tank killers. Statistics gathered after the war confirmed the scale of this transformation. Between 1942 and 1945, German tank losses caused by infantry weapons increased dramatically. At the same time, Allied casualties caused by tank attacks dropped significantly as infantry units gained the ability to defend themselves. Behind this dramatic shift stood the work of one unlikely inventor, Henry Mohaupt, a man whose background was rooted in farming knowledge and industrial chemistry, had unknowingly changed the balance of battlefield power. His understanding of explosives had given individual soldiers the ability to destroy some of the most advanced armored vehicles ever created. The story reached its final chapter on May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. As Allied forces celebrated Germany's surrender, captured German military documents began revealing the full impact of the shaped charge revolution. By the end of the war, German forces had lost thousands of armored vehicles to infantry weapons. In many cases, more tanks were destroyed by soldiers carrying portable launchers than by heavy artillery or even other tanks. The technology developed from Mohaupt's early experiments had fundamentally altered the balance of ground warfare. Post-war studies also revealed astonishing production figures. Between 1942 and 1945, American factories manufactured more than 20 million bazooka rockets. That number represented an enormous industrial effort, but ensured that nearly every American infantry unit had access to anti-tank capability. Captured German engineers later admitted that they had been impressed by the effectiveness of the American design. Although Germany developed its own rocket-powered anti-tank weapons during the war, many of them were direct responses to the technology first demonstrated by Mohaupt. Senior German commanders even acknowledged that the widespread use of portable anti-tank weapons forced major changes in their battlefield tactics. Tanks could no longer advance confidently alongside infantry without facing the constant threat of hidden rocket launchers. The legacy of Mohaupt's invention did not end with World War II. The same fundamental principle he discovered in a small Swiss laboratory continues to influence modern weapons. Shaped charge technology remains at the heart of many anti-tank systems used by militaries around the world. Modern launchers and guided missiles rely on the same idea, focusing explosive energy into a powerful jet capable of piercing armored steel. Although the weapons have become more advanced, the basic science remains remarkably similar to the experiments conducted by a curious inventor nearly a century ago. Veterans of modern conflicts have often remarked on this connection. Soldiers carrying modern anti-tank launchers know that the technology in their hands traces back to discoveries made during the Second World War. Over the decades, shape-charged weapons have continued to evolve. Engineers have refined the design to achieve astonishing levels of performance. Modern warheads can penetrate armor far thicker than anything imagined during the early years of tank warfare. This capability has had a profound impact on military strategy. The widespread availability of portable anti-tank weapons has made armored vehicles far more vulnerable than they once were. Expensive tanks must now operate cautiously, aware that even a single infantry soldier may be capable of destroying them. Henry Mohaupt lived long enough to witness the influence of his discovery. He eventually settled in California, where he spent the later years of his life far from the battlefields his invention had once influenced. When he passed away on May 20th, 2001, his death received little international attention. His obituary mentioned his work only briefly, reflecting the quiet personality of a man who had never sought fame. Yet the impact of his discovery continues to echo across modern battlefields. In a world where technological innovation often determines victory or defeat, Mohaupt's story serves as a powerful reminder that revolutionary ideas can emerge in the most unexpected places. A modest inventor working in a small laboratory managed to challenge established thinking and change the course of military technology. His shape-charged invention did more than destroy tanks. It proved that creativity and persistence could overcome even the most intimidating engineering problems. And in doing so, Henry Mohaupt left behind a legacy that continues to influence warfare to this very day.